it's clear that investing in mental health is more important now than ever. So we all know kind of the toll that the pandemic and the current kind of climate has taken on us. And a recent paper, the references down here, estimated the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on depression and anxiety across the world. And for every single country with available data, the pandemic has caused an increase in anxiety and depression. So globally, major depression diagnoses have increased by almost 28%. Anxiety disorders have increased by about 26%. And this study also calculated how many healthy life years have been lost due to depression and anxiety, and found that across the world, almost 94 million years without disability have been lost, right? These numbers are really staggering. So I want to start out by talking about, well, what is research and why is it critical for mental health? So research is simply the process of gathering and analyzing information so that we can increase knowledge. And mental health research stands to promote mental health and reduce the burden of mental illness. And how might we do that, right? How might research promote mental wellness? As some examples, research can help identify the risk and the protective factors attribute to mental health, right? So what are the factors that put people at risk for developing mental health conditions and mental illness? And what are the factors that may buffer against these risks? Research can also help us understand how to promote mental health and evaluate what works and for whom, right? We know that there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution for all mental health concerns, right? And research can help us understand the kind of treatments and interventions that work, and maybe more importantly, what's going to work best for a given person. Research importantly helps us understand whether current services and resources are available and sufficient to meet a community's needs. And data can be used to change systems and policies around mental health. So lots of, potential valuable contributions that mental health research can make to overall mental wellness. So what are we trying to do here with MSU Mental Health Research Connect? Ultimately, the major thing we're trying to do is to bridge the gap between researchers and individuals whose lives are impacted by mental illness. So our mission then is through, education and outreach to increase engagement in mental health research and to empower community members who might be affected by mental health challenges through collaboration and through personal contributions. So I want to take a moment to recognize the people who've been involved in this project. First, I want to recognize Jessica Fatal, who's the project manager and has done just a tremendous amount of work to get this project off the ground. I also want to thank Han Wang, who created our website. And I want to recognize our community advisory board, Kathy Adams, Dr. Cass Anderson Carpenter, Shermany Hickman, Patrick Kaufmann, and Dr. Jay Puckett. So this community advisory board comprises mental health advocates, researchers, clinical care providers, and the advisory board was part of every single aspect of project development. So I'd like to, extend my really heartfelt gratitude to all these folks who dedicated time, expertise, compassion, energy, et cetera, to this initiative. And I also want to thank the Department of Psychology and the College of Social Science here at MSU for funding and supporting this initiative. Okay, so let me lay out our goals here. Our first goal is to alert community members who sign up for studies, who sign up for Mental Health Research Connect for studies for which they might be interested in participating. So when folks sign up for Mental Health Research Connect, we ask them to complete a short survey, and the information provided in that survey is used to match people to research studies. So we never pass on anybody's information. We just let people know about ongoing studies and they can participate if they're interested. Two, we recognize that people who stand to be most impacted by mental health research often aren't given enough of an opportunity to provide input into what should be researched and how that research should be done. And we think that severely limits the quality and the impact of research findings. So we want to hear from people about their ideas for research priorities and what would help people feel more comfortable in a research setting. Three, we sponsor regular outreach activities. 4, we provide information on our website to empower and support people who are considering participating in research so that people can make more informed decisions about whether they should participate, what they should expect in research, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, through our website and through outreach events, we share mental health research findings with community members. So why consider joining MSU Mental Health Research Connect? First of all, your contribution matters, right? By participating in research, people can contribute to a deeper understanding of mental health and to developing more effective ways of improving well-being and care. Second, your opinion matters. So we invite folks to share what they think is most important in the field of mental health, and we in turn share this information with mental health researchers. In addition, we invite people to share any accommodations that would make them feel more supported in a research study. So let me share a little bit about what we've learned already from the 122 people that have joined MSU Mental Health Research Connect. First of all, we've learned from people what about the kinds of accommodations that would make people more likely to be able to participate in research and to feel comfortable and supported in a research environment. So some things that individuals brought up were things like to offer transportation, ensure a calm research environment, the ability to potentially participate virtually or over the phone, accommodating disabilities, knowing where the exits are and making it clear that people have the freedom to leave at any point, schedule flexibility, control over the method of contact so that people aren't getting phone calls, when they might not be expecting them or inopportune times. We also got a lot of responses on what mental health research should focus on. And we divided these up into several categories. The first one being strength and resilience. Here people are wanting to know more about what kind of strengths can help promote mental health and protect against the risks that we tend to kind of focus on in this area. In addition, a lot of folks were interested in learning more about stigma and barriers to help seeking. So thinking about, more studies into what causes stigma around mental health, how to mitigate stigma around mental health, and thinking about what barriers people might be encountering when it comes to seeking help for mental health concerns. A lot of folks were interested in learning more, wanting more research on the different determinants of mental health. So not just the biology, but the different social factors that shape our mental health. And finally, many folks were interested in treatment, right? Both kind of learning more about maybe what we would call mainstream treatments in psychology and psychiatry, but also wanting to learn more about treatments that we don't always think about in this kind of Western model we often subscribe to. And finally, we asked people about their motivations for participating in research. And these are kind of broken down here. The biggest motivators by far were the chance to contribute to a broader knowledge base and to help others. So for example, one person said that mental health research promotes understanding and connection in regards to mental health matters. It's so important for the knowledge and data to be shared in a way that helps the public understand and continue to destigmatize mental health. Another person said that as a person who lives with a mental health disorder in the Black community, I believe we are underrepresented. Likewise, other people said to decrease the stigma, to help with future treatments, and people struggling with any mental health issues. So people have a range of motivations for participating, but they're largely focused on how their contributions can kind of increase knowledge and help other folks that may be struggling with their mental health. So coming back to the reasons, why joining is a valuable contribution, another major thing is that representation matters, and it matters a lot. So research volunteers are often not representative of the US population. And that means that we don't know whether findings or treatments or these outcomes of research studies apply to everybody. And so one thing that we are really focusing on is figuring out ways to increase diversity among research participants, because we think discoveries should benefit everybody. And finally, knowledge matters. So one of our goals is some of our goals are to highlight research findings in mental health research, to organize educational events, to engage in the sharing of knowledge in a way that's accessible to everybody, and to help to spread more accurate information about mental health. And we think, this kind of knowledge sharing is going to be really important in fighting the stigma that continues to surround mental health and mental illness. So with that all being said, I'm going to move on to probably what you came here for, and that's our speakers tonight. So here's our lineup. First, Shermany Hickman and Patrick Kaufmann, two members of our Community Advisory Board, will speak. Then Courtney Louis, who's a Ph.D. student in the clinical psychology program at MSU, will present some of her work on anxiety. And finally, Bill Chopik, who's faculty in psychology at MSU, will be presenting some of his work on how social relationships contribute to our mental and physical health. And so there's the option to ask questions after. We'll have some time after the talks for some questions. So in your Zoom screen here, you should see a little button called Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom window. So what you can do is you can click there, you can type your question into the window at any time. So either myself or Jessica will be reading through the questions, and then after the speaker is done, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So I apologize if we don't get to all your questions, but Jessica, if she hasn't already, is going to pop our contact information in the chat. If you have burning questions, we can for sure pass those on to the speakers, and they can get to them when they can. And finally, I just want to say we hope that during our webinar today, we can all contribute to a respectful and inclusive environment. Okay, so finally, I'm just, this contact information is in the chat, but if you have any questions about who we are, what we're doing, if you're interested in contributing, if you're interested in learning more, please contact us using any of the following methods. You can reach us at this phone number, you can reach us by email, and there's a way to contact us through our website and to learn more about our initiative. So with that all being said, let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I'd like to introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is Ms. Shermany Hickman. Shermany is a member of our Community Advisory Board. She's an MSU grad, and she currently works as an operations coordinator at Red Global. She is a dedicated mental health advocate and valuable member of the Lansing community. And her talk is titled Potential Impact of Mental Health Research Connect for the Community. So with that being said, I will pass the mic on to Shermany.
Hello, thank you for introducing me, Katie. Once again, my name is Shermany, pronounced like Germany, but with an SH, just in case you didn't, you missed that. I'm originally from Georgia, but I came up here for college and kind of just stuck around. So I'd like to share a little bit about my mental health journey and then how I think this Mental Health Research Connect can impact the community. So I would say my mental health journey, where I first started displaying symptoms, was definitely when I was a teenager. I felt very alone. Anytime I spoke about it, it was definitely not a real thing. Black people don't get this. That's, it's fake. You have nothing to be depressed about. You're not paying bills, et cetera, et cetera. And after hospitalization, I got the, well, you're crazy. It was never any in between, unfortunately. So I felt very alone and like I had no one to talk to about it. So by the time I came to college, the mental health declined severely, and I felt ashamed. I was ashamed to use resources that were available to help me, which caused me to even struggle even more than I had to, because I was ashamed to reach out, because previously I had been told that, this is not a real thing. It's, not something that I would get. This unfortunately caused me to spiral uncontrollably, hurt relationships and hurt opportunities I had because I just didn't reach out. finally, when reaching adulthood, I found community. I found people who were like me, who had the same problems as me, that I wasn't ashamed anymore. I felt that I needed to share my story in hopes that I could help someone, help me, from a 16-year-old girl who feels alone, or anyone who feels alone, that they can get inspired by my story and that they'll be okay. It just, you got to get through it. And hopefully we'll have more resources like Mental Health Research Connect in the future, so that it's just not me feeling like I'm speaking into a void. I'm actually helping. And that was a big reason why I wanted to join Mental Health Research Connect, because I felt like it could help with not only sharing my story, but impacting the community. I would say a big thing is visibility. I want others to feel not so alone. I don't want others to struggle when there's resources out there. I really am hoping that this opens doors for underrepresented community, and that with these studies, as Katie said in the previously, that this will, more visibility means that these studies are more specific to people of minority communities. I'm really hoping that it also demystifies the research side, because it can be scary to one, open up, but two, open up about these deep, dark secrets that we're not supposed to tell anyone. And it seems scary, and what's available is not always, it's fictionalized and seems so scary. So I'm hoping it really demystifies that process on the other hand. And finally, I really hope it removes some stigma. The more people talk about it, the more that it's out there and free, it's more likely that people are going to want to come forward and we receive help. So I'm hoping that with this, more people are willing to share their stories, and we just, like a community chain, continue to share our stories and get this research out there for everyone. So in that sense, I hope that in sharing my story, that I can inspire someone to come forward, and that we have more community members in Mental Health Research Connect. Oh wow, I talked faster than I thought I would. I will add additionally that with this board, I have learned more on my side as a community member, with just on the other side of the fence. So it really has brought me closer to it as well, it being the research side, the helpful side. So yes, I'm very grateful for the experience.
Thank you so much, Shermany. I don't know if folks can see and hear me okay. But yeah, I'd like to, again, thank you for sharing your story. And thank you for just the amazingly valuable contributions you've made to this initiative. I'll open the floor up for questions if anyone has questions for Shermany. So while we wait for any to come in, I really love how you highlighted kind of demystifying the process, because I can say as a researcher, that's something that I think many of us don't think about as much, right? Is what it kind of feels like to come in and, like you said, share what feel like kind of things that you don't share with other people. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts about, even just an idea about, what is something that maybe doesn't get thought about enough on the researcher end that you think is important for folks that are considering and might empower and folks participating in research?
I think I would say people who look like me or look like people in the community, so I'm not, I'm not feeling othered is a big thing, is not feeling othered. But I would also say kindness. We can forget that, it's like, oh, this is just research. This is, almost like a straight shooter. But, these are people, we are people, and who probably haven't experienced any type of compassion prior to. So just a little bit of, sweetness, it goes a long way.
Yeah,
I would think, especially regarding research, which can be sometimes dry, even if we don't mean it to be dry.
Yeah. Thank you. And I have a question here from Kathy Adams. How do you think we can do better at reaching marginalized communities with mental health research and mental health support?
I would say, honestly, going into the communities, I think also what happens is these things can be posted in areas where you're not really meaning to, you're not even going to attract the crowd that you're looking for, just simply because of where this information is available. So it would be honestly places like community centers or schools, if we can get, children and teenagers, or simply places where people would gather, maybe that'd be a religious venue, just more community-based instead of, oh, we're posting this on a college research website that only maybe a student would know because their teacher told them or their professor told them. It should definitely be more places where the community are, because that is the only way we're going to get the community to participate.
Got it. Well, Shermany, thank you so much. Thank you for fielding these questions, and thanks for the folks in the audience who pose questions to Shermany. All right, so I will introduce our next speaker, who is Mr. Patrick Kaufmann. So Patrick is also a member of the MHRC Mental Health Research Connect Community Advisory Board, and he's an employment and education peer specialist at Integrated Services of Kalamazoo. He and his wife actually brought the first peer recovery programs into 2 psychiatric hospitals in Michigan, and he co-founded and directed a mental health nonprofit organization that organizes peer-run parties, campouts, and other events. More recently, he's written his memoirs. And he's going to be presenting a talk entitled "Research Helps People Like Me." So, take it away, Patrick.
Thanks, Katie. I could introduce myself as saying I'm Patrick. I'm a voice hearer. That's not something we always hear, but by the end of the conversation, hopefully people reconsider that. When I first started hearing voices, honestly, it was kind of fun. It made me laugh. But very soon after, it got to where I couldn't control it, and it was very disturbing. I couldn't tell people about it. Long story short, the mental health system had me hospitalized. I was on court orders. I felt like I was being punished for my experience. And the message from society is there's something wrong with you. It's behavioral. It was, well, I guess the comparison is the other countries that I just saw a presentation recently about a woman who was learning from like her ancient tribes about how this was a gift, and she's doing that work currently presenting that to people and sort of the healing spirit. But in other countries where it's more accepted, there's not as much problem with it. People don't internalize the stigma. They don't have the distress associated with hearing voices. So hearing voices, in short, in itself is not a negative experience. It's not pathological. The problem comes with the distress associated with the voices. So a lot of that distress is coming from the stigma, which if that wasn't there, hearing voices might not be the problem. Research, for one, has shown that was based on research, that they've actually proven that it's not as bad here, and there's a link with spirituality and hearing voices as not being negative. Also, something that I learned was that 3 in 10 people have some kind of experience within their lifetime of hearing voices or believing something other people don't, that sort of thing. 1 in 100 people hear voices, so it's not that uncommon. And then, let me correct that. 1 in 100 people are diagnosed. 3 in 100 people have experiences hearing voices on a regular basis. So 2/3 of the people that have that experience, it's not pathological. They're not having a problem with it. So that's other research that would have been important for me to know, that because ultimately that tells you that you can hear voices and not be ill. So if I had known that, I would have been dealing with the problems associated with the voices, not being mad at myself for being alienated or getting stuck in the system, thinking, or not even knowing what was going on and feeling like something associated with my beliefs and spirituality is also a negative thing that I should be told not to do, rather than focusing on, why are these voices mean to you? How do you deal with that? So eventually with that experience, I was able to deal with the mean voices, I guess is a way to say that. And I engaged them. So I would say, well, after all this, let me just ask you, why are you angry? Why are you in my life? What are you mad about? What's difficult for you? And believe it or not, the voice was like, hey, okay, let's talk about that. And eventually I was like a parental figure to this voice that for so long had been tormenting me. And now today that voice is still around, not often, but if it is, it's like we laugh, we're friends now. So these are all things. I spent 10 years stuck in the mental health system, repeatedly getting hospitalized, not telling anybody about my problems because I didn't want to get hospitalized. And, that could have been different if someone had given me a different story when this started. But now, fortunately, this is more and more known. So this information is getting out there. Eleanor Longden is a famous, now famous, in my opinion, for doing a TED Talks and being part of the Hearing Voices movement. She's got a great message. A lot of the research that I'm referring to is from Hearing Voices movement and Hearing Voices Network. It's just an example of how research changes everything, changes the game. And another thing I've learned that there's research now about, like, in the past, people would have told me, ignore those voices, just make them go away. I think a lot of psychiatrists think that, like, ignore them. They shouldn't be there. They're bad for you. If you can't ignore them, you're still sick. Where what I learned is you can engage them. I learned that just by luck, but the word is out there now, basically. And that's what people are doing, is actually doing exercises where they talk to the voice, or another person will talk to the voice that the individual is hearing, and work through it that way and come to solutions. So there's so much that's working now that science and Western medicine was telling us, no, this is how you do it, and it wasn't working the way they were doing it. So yeah, things got better for me, and today I can help other people with knowing what I know, and that's all thanks to the people that were part of that participatory research, and actually guiding research, people that were part of the whole process of discovering what works and proving it. A lot of it they already knew, but they had to get the research behind it. And another thing about research is its leverage. I can tell my psychiatrist now, like, no, this is the evidence. I'm not sick, and you know, and everything else that I learned, I can tell them that, and they have to listen. Basically, we can tell families these things, and it changes the dynamic with an individual and their family. Because some people just, they'll only listen to research. So that's why research is great. So hopefully there will be more in the future. I really envision an accepting community. Hopefully the little bits that I told you guys just now make you think a little differently about the Hearing Voices experience. And if our community, our society would look at things that way, then there wouldn't be those of us internalizing this so-called illness and making it worse for people. And I mean, who knows how many suicides are just because of stigma, you know? And you know, the system will change. That's the expectation. So yeah, there's so much difference that it makes. And you know, I didn't mention this, but there was a long time in my life where I didn't realize that sorry, I was just checking something. There's a long time in my life where I didn't realize that it was okay to hear voices. So I was telling people, like, I was in recovery, I was doing really well, I quit drugs, I wasn't having negative experiences, but I told people I didn't hear voices. That wasn't helpful to the people I served in the mental health system as a peer support, but I really didn't think I heard voices. I thought it was gone because I told myself, if I hear voices, I'm not in recovery. This is a dangerous thing. I'm not going to say I'm not in recovery because it's so important to me. But it turns out that it's okay to hear voices. And now I can tell people that, and you're not fighting yourself. You're just being natural with who you are and what your experience is. And if it's spiritual for you, you can run with it as long as you can fit into the world as it is. So yeah, that's what I learned.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I really appreciate you kind of sharing your story, your insights, the way that kind of what research has kind of meant to you in your journey. We have a question here. Patrick, do you feel that if you had something like Mental Health Research Connect when you first experienced hearing voices, that you would have been involved? I guess, would you have liked to have been involved in kind of research related endeavors when you first started hearing voices?
In such a huge way. You know, first of all, just someone having an interest in my experience, someone saying that my voice mattered, that would have been amazing to me, just to hear that, and to be able to share ideas of what's important to me and what I believe and what my truths are, and to be valued for that. That would have been huge. And yeah, and it means so much to people like me to get involved in the system and be part of it. It's so validating. It builds you up, not as just an individual, but as a community, that people want to hear from us, and that, you know, we might not be all professors, but we have a whole lot of input that's super important.
Absolutely. And I wondered, I hope you don't mind me dragging on with my own question, but, you know, it struck me as you were talking that, you know, as someone who had heard voices, right, you have this critical insight into what worked, right? And you know, like you said, that research is building up now about engaging with voices, but it's not so intuitive, I guess, for someone who may not experience voices, that engaging them would be, you know, therapeutic and beneficial. And I wondered, generally what your thoughts are on, you mentioned participatory research, right? How, how do you think our field, mental health research field, can be more inclusive to people of who are, I guess, people with lived experience, right, of what's actually the topic of study? I mean, do you have any kind of practical suggestions? And, I feel like the onus is on academia, right?
Yeah. Well, beyond just actually reaching out to people and getting the message to them, beyond that, it's about that message of not just, hey, we need your information on this, we're just going to ask you a bunch of questions, blah, blah, but more like your voice matters and you have so much to offer. And, you are part of the change that's going to happen if we can learn more, and really building people up and letting them know they're valuable.
Mm. Any other questions from the panelists or from the audience? We have a couple more minutes. Well, I guess I hope you don't mind me bugging you with one more question then. What is, I think it's important for these to be genuine, feel like you're making a genuine contribution. How would that look like to you? I mean, is it in the form of, being a formal part of developing the question, being part of writing things up? I mean, as from your perspective, what would you like your involvement to look like, I guess? What do you want to get out of it in kind of more practical ways?
Well, yeah, I think it starts with just what I was originally involved with was just getting someone reaching out to me asking for my personal experience, which was very validating. But I'd like it to go all the way to as far as it can go with what if I presented the question for the research? For example, the program that I do, I would like to show how much getting out and volunteering as a group of peers and doing events and that sort of thing can help people recover from mental illnesses just by being involved in the world. Like something like that. What if I put that question out there and then I had all this muscle behind the research to make that happen? And there's so many questions out there that would be so valuable based on somebody's intuition about, like, I know this is going to work, and being able to show that.
So a truly collaborative process. Yeah,
absolutely.
Seeing Bill's hand raised. I don't know if that's an accident or okay.
Yeah, I have a question. So thank you so much for telling us about your experiences. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about your work now? So I know you mentioned a few things about offering services for, some of the first times people can actually go and seek help and treatment. Can you tell us a little bit about the services that, you offer that you're currently working with in the community?
Yeah, I'm with Navigate, which is early intervention for psychosis. So it's kind of neat the way that works, because people are first having that experience. We're trying to catch people right away. And, the magic of what I get to do is that I can tell them, like, hey, you're not crazy, and this is a normal experience, especially if you're responding to trauma or it's biological, or, so I get to be one of those people that's normalizing the experience and welcoming into the program, where we work on employment and education and therapy and family work and all things like that. And and I get to share that experience. And I also am starting a project up again where, like I said, we're doing events and volunteering and that sort of thing, to get people active.
Thank you again, Patrick, for this powerful talk, and thank you for the questions in the audience.
Sure.
All righty, so we're going to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Courtney Louis. So Courtney is a Ph.D. student in clinical psychology here at Michigan State. A large part of her work and activities are really dedicated to reducing barriers to attaining goals for women, gender diverse, and BIPOC communities, which has led to her serving on the Ingham County Women's Commission, and the e-board of the Black Graduate Student Association. She's passionate about providing mentorship, which has led to co-founding an organization called Our Collective Brains, which is a group aimed to provide mentorship and guidance for undergrads who major in psychology and neuroscience. And finally, she's a committee member for the Public Education Committee of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, which aims to expand public education and outreach around anxiety, depression, and co-occurring disorders. So she's done 3 PhDs worth of work already. And Courtney's going to be presenting a talk titled, How Anxiety Affects Our Thinking. What can neuroscience tell us? So Courtney, feel free or share your slides and take it away.
Thank you, Katie. It'll just take me a couple seconds here to get my slides up. Okay. Can everybody see my slides? And everybody can hear me? Okay, doing the usual Zoom checks. So very happy to be here and talk to you all today. And I'll be talking about how anxiety affects our thinking and talk a little bit about what neuroscience can tell us about that, what it has told us, and our hopes for what it can tell us in the future. So like Katie said, my name is Courtney and I am a PhD student working in the clinical psychophysiology lab where I work with Dr. Moser, who's the director of that lab. And the aim of this lab is to utilize physiological methods to understand emotion and cognition in individuals who experience anxiety. So I'm just going to take some time to walk us through how we think about anxiety and cognition and how anxiety impacts cognition. So to start, to get us all on the same page about what anxiety is generally a feeling we get when we anticipate something threatening or challenging. So researchers broadly think of anxiety as being distinguishable into 2 dimensions. So one of them is arousal. So we can think about when our heart is beating really fast, or maybe we feel sweaty or clammy or fidgety. That's usually the arousal-based dimension of anxiety that you feel in your body. And the other kind is apprehension, or what you experience in your thoughts. So oftentimes we call these worries. So this oftentimes takes place maybe when we have something stressful coming up and we're thinking what if thoughts, like what if something bad happens, or what if I'm not ready for this thing? Oftentimes that's the cognitive dimension of anxiety, or the kind that exists in the mind. And sometimes these things can co-occur, meaning they happen at the same time, and sometimes they don't. So sometimes you might be experiencing one more than the other. Also, anxiety can be experienced across a spectrum of severity. So for some people, it may be that they experience minimal anxiety in the face of certain challenges or threats, and for others, it can be really long-term and chronic, even without necessarily being able to identify what a threatening situation could be causing that anxiety. And lastly, we know that anxiety can impact our behaviors and our thoughts. So I'm going to be spending some time talking a little bit about how it affects our thoughts. So throughout this presentation, I'll probably be using the word cognition or cognitive processes, and broadly that just means thinking. And in psychological research, we often study mental processes that support our thinking. And this is done by asking people to complete tasks in the lab that tap into certain brain processes. So maybe you'll ask people to come into the lab and do certain tasks that really rely on memory processes and things like that to assess what might be happening when people are asked to memorize certain things, for instance. There we go. And researchers study many brain processes, but generally we tend to summarize these processes under 2 broad categories. So one category is a top-down category, which is really goal-directed and controlled. And another category is a bottom-up category, which is importance-driven and tends to be more automatic. So I'm going to break this down with a quick example. So let's first start with a top-down process. So let's imagine somebody who's trying to focus perhaps on reading an article on their laptop. And you can imagine if somebody really has this goal, the clear goal, read this article on this laptop in these next few minutes, they'll be very goal focused. So that's the goal and they're trying to do that. And in the meantime, they're also trying to inhibit distraction. So maybe not opening other tabs or looking at the phone, looking out the window, things like that, or proactively keeping that information in mind. So that's an example of really implementing top-down processes to have a goal in mind and perform that goal. Bottom-up processes, while trying to do the same task, might look something a little different. So in this case, your goal could still be to read that article, but maybe you're getting distracted by worrisome thoughts, maybe you're getting notifications or looking at other tabs, and you can become easily distracted and trying to hold many things in mind. So what we've learned is that anxiety impacts our thinking processes by impacting the balance between these top-down processes and bottom-up processes. And it does that by biasing the bottom-up processes. So oftentimes when you're anxious, you might be scanning your environment for potential threats or trying to be really attentive about the things that are happening around you. So that really strains those cognitive resources and makes it more difficult to implement top-down processes. And what that might look like is that it might take a little bit more effort to read that article, for instance, when you're also trying to hold anxious thoughts or you're feeling anxious. It might be really difficult to minimize distraction. And it might be the case that because anxiety is present, you're trying to hold multiple things in mind. So trying to read that article while also thinking about all the things that you have to do the next day. We've also found that worry, which is a particular dimension of anxiety, might particularly affect the ability to implement these top-down processes. So neuroscience methods are a powerful tool to help us understand how this might happen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what neuroscience can tell us and what it has told us through some of the work that we've done in our lab, as well as highlighting some work in other research labs. So there are many ways that you can measure activity in the brain while people are performing some of these cognitive tasks that we were talking about in the lab. And across a variety of different methods of studying the brain, we've learned that the frontal part of the brain, so we're thinking about this kind of purplish region here, is really important for implementing top-down processes. So a lot of those kind of goal-directed, inhibiting distraction, keeping things in mind is really supported by that region of the brain. And we learned that anxiety changes how this region functions. So I want to be clear that a lot of the focus in our lab is not necessarily looking at how brains are different. Really what we're trying to do is think about how when anxiety is present, your brain is trying to adapt and how it does that. So it's really changing how your brain is functioning in the face of trying to hold some additional things like anxiety. So one common method we use in our lab to investigate this is to measure electrical activity on the scalp. And this is an example of how we do that. So we usually ask people to come into the lab and wear a stretch cap and attach electrodes to that cap, and that allows us to measure electrical activity in the brain. And then we try to maximize that signal while people are performing certain tasks in the lab, and that gives us information about certain cognitive processes that people implement while doing things. So I want to highlight one particularly relevant signal, which is called the error-related negativity. So this is what the signal looks like. So just to orient everybody to this graph, on this across here, horizontally, these numbers are times in milliseconds. So we're thinking portions of a second. And we learned that when somebody makes an error, they get this really large signal that appears 100 milliseconds after making an error. So it's really quick in comparison to this signal, which is after you make a correct response. So this black line is errors and this grayish line is correct responses. And we think of this signal as an oops, I made a mistake signal. So this is just your brain registering, oh no, I've made a mistake during this task. And for anxious individuals in particular, those who worry, we've learned that they show a larger error-related signal than non-anxious individuals. And we think that this may be because anxious individuals are holding some more things in mind because of their anxiety. And so they need sort of a louder signal in order to signal to the brain that they need more help, right? So it kind of needs to be amplified for individuals with anxiety. due to the distracting effects of worry. So importantly, using this, it gives us information about how our brains are adapting and how it functions in the face of challenges. So we often also see that it's not necessarily the case that people who are anxious can't complete tasks, or that they necessarily perform worse than non-anxious individuals or people who aren't also experiencing high levels of anxiety. The way that this happens typically is your brain tries to adapt, and one way that this happens is with this larger signal, and this might result in more effort, more time, and perhaps more burnout for people who are also experiencing anxiety. So a couple of things that I wanted to highlight here is that anxiety's impacts are not universal, and a big part of what we are trying to kind of dig deeper into in our lab is think about who the signal may be more relevant for. And I think Katie really did a really nice job talking about representation and how that matters in science. And we're just now catching up with some of the things that we found and trying to think about who they apply to. And so I want to talk a little bit about when we're thinking about anxiety's impacts, how they might come up for different groups of people and who we think this ERN signal might particularly apply to. So through studying this signal, we've learned that this particular cognitive impact of anxiety does not apply to everybody. And importantly, we found that there are sex differences in how worry impacts this ERN signal, such as people who are assigned female sex at birth have a larger ERN or kind of have that larger error signal. And work in our lab, I think there are many ways that one can pursue investigating this, like societal factors, gender-based socialization could be a part of it. And one way that we've pursued in our lab so far is thinking about ovarian hormones, so estrogen and progesterone, and thinking about how these hormones have really strong, powerful effects on the brain, and in particular, that region of the brain, that frontal region that's really impacted by anxiety, and also important for implementing those top-down processes. So a lot of what we've been thinking about is how worry and ovarian hormones might interact to affect this brain signal in particular. And some preliminary work in our lab has shown that it's actually the case that people who have higher levels of estrogen might actually have a buffer for this signal. So it might actually protect against this enhanced signal for anxiety. Another way that the pathway for how anxiety might impact cognition may be different is for people of color. So really highlighting work from other research labs that have looked at the consequence of discrimination and marginalization for people of color. They found that that increased demand of having experienced discrimination also really taxes that frontal region of the brain in the similar way that anxiety does. So we find that kind of the pathway for leading to worry, so kind of external things that leads to a heightened experience of worry, also influences this region of the brain in a similar way by increasing the demands on this region. So this might make your body have to work in overdrive in order to complete certain tasks. So just to provide a quick summary here, that prefrontal region of the brain where top-down processing happens is really sensitive to increased demands. And we've learned that it's really responsive to internal states and external states. So things like anxiety, which we may be experiencing internally, but also external things that might influence the presence of anxiety, like discrimination, and therefore impacts the way your brain tries to adapt to that. We've also learned that these increased demands placed on this region can influence our ability to complete tasks that really require those top-down processes to be implemented. And lastly, I just want to conclude with why this matters. And I think, a lot of the conversation today has really talked a great deal about why this matters in ways that I think have been really great. And I'm really appreciative to be a part of this conversation so far. But just quickly, a few thoughts that using neuroscience methods can not only clarify the effects of anxiety on how we think, but they can also help clarify how this may happen. So it gives us a really helpful target to think about when we're thinking about improving anxiety and its impacts, by learning the ways in which your body might be functioning, it might also help us understand how treatment might remediate some of those effects as well. And lastly, we hope that an enhanced understanding of how anxiety impacts the way we think, who might be more at risk for certain impacts, and when this might happen, can help increase the specificity of treatment to address how anxiety is impacting our ability to function. So with that, I just want to say a quick thank you to everybody here, but also to folks in the clinical psychophysiology lab, and I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Thank you so much, Courtney, for breaking this down in a way we can digest. This is challenging stuff. We have a question from the audience from David McFarlane about gender diversity. So he's asking, what effect does gender change after birth or gender fluidity have on the ERN response?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we don't know is the answer to that. So really all we know is that for folks who have menstrual cycles, and we've at least have some folks in our sample who don't identify as women. So a couple of people in our sample identify as non-binary or gender fluid, and also so the same effect. So we at least know for folks who have menstrual cycles, meaning they have like circulating levels of estradiol and progesterone, there might be this mitigating effect of estrogen, but we really haven't done any specific tests other than that. So I think that's just an area of research that remains to be explored and needs to be explored. That's a good question.
We have time for one more question, if anyone has a. Well, I have a oh, yeah, Bill had a question.
I do. So knowing a little bit about these differences, can you tell a little bit about how to tailor interventions? Like if we wanted to help people with anxiety, what are the different ways we should kind of target it based on their oopsie kind of signs that we see in their studies?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question that I think we're still trying to think more about. So I think in some ways we have evidence to suggest that some of the, some psychotherapy that we already implement does influence, at least broadly, this region of the brain. So even in one of the analyses I've done, I've been able to see that there are in fact some changes with standard therapy with how that cognitive control is implemented for people. And that's for traditional kind of thinking about face-to-face therapy, but also even for some that are kind of computer-based cognitive training. So that's really cool, and that some of the things we are doing might be helping already. And there's some work from previous folks in the lab that have showed things like expressive writing might be a really helpful strategy. So kind of alleviating those worries beforehand might help reduce the need for that amplified signal. And I think as far as kind of thinking about how to develop novel treatments or ways that we might kind of think about who is at risk is still under development as we think a little bit more about what are some of the mechanisms at play for how anxiety impacts cognition, but at least we know some of the things that we already know might work can also affect this. So.
Well, thank you so much, Courtney. I think, oops. I hit my Q&A. I think we got to all the questions there. So thank you again. Yeah. And our final speaker is Dr. Bill Chopik. So Bill is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology here at MSU. He has been the recipient of many, many awards, including Forbes's top 30 scientists under 30, when he was mostly just bragging that he was under 30, and the Association for Psychological Sciences Rising Star Award. So Bill's work focuses on how close relationships and the people in them change over time and across situations. So this research focuses on how factors both inside and outside individuals, from biology to where they live, influences their approach to social relationships. And today he's going to be talking about a few of his research studies examining the role of friendships and how they affect mental and physical health in different contexts. And his talk is titled "Friendship Importance Around the World, Links to Mental and Physical Health." So Bill, thanks for being with us, and take it away.
Great, thanks so much. Yes, I'm Bill, no longer 30. If you can tell by my hairline, I used to be 30 at some point, but it's really fun that Dr. Thakkar sort of started out today's talk by asking people part of the connection and part of the group, what are the things that maybe you'd like to know? So in preparation for today's talk, I asked about 1,000 people, looking at the following things, your life as a whole, what do you think contributes most to your happiness? And I'm a relationship researcher, so naturally I tried to ask about the different ways we interact with other people. And the answers might surprise you, so I gave them a long list of stuff that might make people happy. And they could check more than one box. So all these bars could add up to more than 100. And here's what people said. So about half the sample pointed to their spousal or romantic relationships. But then about the same amount of people said that their friendships were really important for their happiness and their mental health. There are a few things that are probably not super surprising and some that it maybe are. So of these 1,000 people, only 4% said that their in-laws were a major source of their happiness. Maybe that's not super shocking. One thing is that people's pets were a big a source of people's happiness. So if you want to go to someone with a problem, maybe it's smarter to go to your cat or your dog than say your mother-in-law. You know, there's a few different sources of places you can go for kind of help and support. People's children were a major important part of it. People's sexual relationships with other people. Some people kind of being comfortable with not having a romantic partner was also kind of a sense of that helped make them happy. But today, the really fascinating thing is that nearly half the sample thought that their friendships were a major support or a major factor in their happiness. But I'll tell you a little secret that almost no one really studies friendships. And the really weird thing about that is when you think about your own life, a lot of it is probably punctuated with friendships. So the really great thing about friendships is it's kind of the earliest relationships you start by choice. So you don't necessarily choose your friends or maybe even some of your early play dates, but then slowly but surely you get to choose who you hang out with. Friends provide a lot of different resources for people. They might provide, say, a shoulder to cry on or give you some sort of advice when things aren't going so well. There's also a sense in which people have tried to come up with ways to make friends, or at least try to pretend like you're making friends. So in 1936, there were a few steps for how to make friends. So be interested in other people, smile, remember someone's name, be a good listener, talk in terms of their interests, try to make people feel special. Those are sort of the keys for how to be a good friend. But if you watch a lot of Netflix shows or movies like I do, you also know that a lot of the most really popular movies, TV shows, novels are built around people that are not very good friends and not very good at social relationships. So the really baffling thing is that, you know, friendships are part of your life. They've been part of your life your whole life. And a lot of people struggle with trying to maintain and form friendships across life. But they are incredibly important for people. So this is a meta-analysis by Juliette Holt-Bludstad. And the longer these bars are, the more influential these are in determining how long you live. So this is trying to predict when people die. So, and this was the top couple bars have to do with people having social relationships. So just having relationships, period, and then having good ones. Those are associated with living longer. And oftentimes these effects are larger than a lot of things that your doctor tells you not to do. So things like smoking a lot, quitting smoking, not drinking, getting vaccinated, exercising, maintaining sort of healthy blood sugar levels or weight. Now, all these things aren't separate from one another, right? So if you have a good relationship, maybe they're telling you you shouldn't drink and smoke as much, or maybe if you're in a good relationship, maybe they tell you you shouldn't eat that huge cake for dessert, or maybe you should sort of go for a walk and get some exercise. But there is a sense in when we look at what predicts when people live or how long they live, their relationships are pretty influential. One really interesting thing, this talk is about friendships, is that they've actually dove into those results and they've tried to split up what is it about relationships that predict how long people live. And the really interesting thing is when they look at across all the different types of relationships in your lives, relationships with your dog, your spouse, your sister and brother. It looks like the largest predictor among all those have to do with having quality friendships. And a lot of it is say how you spend your free time. Do you spend your free time hanging out with people you enjoy and like to hang out with? So there's some evidence to suggest that it's worth splitting up these effects to look at, say, how important friendship is for people's lives. You know, on the surface, a lot of these questions will just look at, do you have someone to talk to? But maybe it depends on who that person is. The really unfortunate thing is that we just don't have a lot of really great information about how important people think friendships are. So you have to think they're important in order to kind of engage in them in the first place, whether or not they matter across the lifespan, and whether or not friendships vary across different contexts. So why would it influence your life over time? Well, there's a few theories. So I'll just give you the really, really simple interpretation. So there's a whole theory in psychology that says, as you get older, you realize that life is short and you might as well invest in stuff that makes you happy. Less so than the more superficial stuff about getting ahead, trying to form a career, trying to like know all the things in trivia. You know, you care less about that stuff as you age and more about like, is the person I'm married to really annoying? Are my friends a huge drain on my life? So this is called socio-emotional selectivity theory, the idea that you select relationships that kind of give you social and emotional benefits. And the basic theory is that over time, you might have fewer friends, but the idea is that the ones that survive are the ones that you derive the most benefits from. They've done a lot of really interesting studies to confirm this theory. I'll tell you one. They would text people throughout the day and they would say, how happy are you right at this exact moment? And then they'll say, who are you around? And then they'll correlate those two things. And by far, people were more happy when they were around their friends than say when they're around, you know, their family or at work. You know, because a lot of times family relationships can be really stressful, but the thing about friends is that we like to spend time doing fun things with them. So naturally, we're in better moods when we're around them. The first study I'll tell you about is a sample of over 300,000 people from about 99 different countries from the World Values Survey. So this particular survey asked people, how important is friendships in your life? And you see that there is some cultural variation in this, where the more red countries tend to be the ones who value, or at least say that friendships are more important in their lives. One interesting thing is that valuing friendships was good for people's health. So the people living in these countries tend to be a little bit healthier. One really fascinating thing you can look at is actually in cultures that struggle economically in terms of human development. So if you say aren't going to live very long, or you struggle having access to the basic necessities of life, it looks like in those particular cultures, the one that are sort of the most vulnerable, it looks like friendships are actually more important in those settings. So one sort of general approach to the lab is actually figuring out, like a lot of the people said earlier, like for whom are these kind of beneficial things most beneficial. So I will tell you that valuing family is also good for you. So if you have a loving spousal relationship, that's also really great. Having friendships is also really good for you. And that was true across the whole lifespan, whether you're just graduating from college or if you're in your 80s or 90s. But the really fascinating thing happened was when we looked at how these things influenced you across the lifespan. So one thing we found is that among this top line, these are the people who said that friendships were an extremely important part of their life. And the people on the bottom said that friendships don't matter as much. And the y-axis is your subjective well-being, which is basically how happy you are. And as you see, with every increasing year of life, the people who thought that friendships were really important got happier and happier and happier. And the rest of the people kind of just stayed relatively stable. And this was sort of the idea that we tried to look at earlier, the fact that maybe over time, if you value these relationships, you start to pick the ones that you really enjoy, and maybe you distance yourself away from the people you find most annoying in life. It's such a controversial idea that you want to spend time with people you love and the people you like. So I will say that it looks like the roles of social networks are different across time. So one thing we tried to do in subsequent work was to zoom in on this part of people's lives. Namely, we tried to look at what's happening among the oldest old, or the oldest adults in society. So we gathered data from about 7,500 people who were then followed over an 8-year period. And this is from a nationally representative sample of older adults. And we asked them all sorts of questions about their lives. So we asked them, we broke it down again, all these sort of relationships in your life, your spousal relationships, if you have kids, how well are those going? Other family, your friends, of course. And we asked about what's called support and strain. And support obviously is, do you go to these people for support? But then one controversial area of this research is that We asked how big of a pain in the butt all these people are. So there's a sense in which having relationships are good for you, but then if they're a constant drag and really annoying, there's a sense that kind of being married to someone who's not very supportive and kind of really mean, and it's probably not good for your happiness either. So we measured all sorts of things about these people, how sick they got, like if they developed chronic illnesses like diabetes, if they got cancer, if they got heart attacks. We also measured their happiness. And what we did is we tried to predict how your happiness and health changed when you were older as a function of all the relationships in your life. And the one thing we found is that of all the things after you control for, say, their education, their race, gender, their health behavior, it looks like the only thing that came out is that our very bad friendships are the things that are making us the most sick when we're older. So we've looked at this a few different ways, say maybe friendships are more harmful for particular subgroups of people. And it looks like the people who aren't able to kind of cut away those negative relationships later in life tend to be more sick and more stressed out. And as a result, they might develop more physical and mental health issues, which I'll talk about in a second. So having good relationships with all sorts of other people in your life is certainly good for you. But one general thing that the lab has tried to do is really try to quantify, hey, where are the good things coming from your life? And maybe there are ways we can cultivate those things so you can enjoy them more often. So if you're curious about the types of stuff that we're trying to do in lab now, I'll just run through a bunch of things really quickly. One is that I told you that not a lot of people study friendships. So one really kind of mysterious thing is that we don't really know when and why or if they're good for you. So I did a really fun study with my friend. That's one really great thing about research, is that we can work with our friends. And we did what's called an outcome-wide analysis. And basically what we do is we grab all the data we have available and we just look to see what friendship is related to. So there's a bunch of methodological reasons I won't bore you with, namely like when researchers do a study and they don't find anything, they just never tell anybody about it. That's actually a big problem. But what we did is we actually followed about 13,000 older adults, and we just looked at how they psychologically and physically changed over time. So one thing we found is that if you just talk to a friend, so this is not even having an amazing friend, it's just, do you talk to them at least, say, once or twice a week? Those people tend to live longer, controlling for all these other various health risks. Interestingly, we don't know why. So it's not like a lot of people were sort of not getting sick for various reasons, and yet they still tended to hang on and live longer. They also had fewer depressive symptoms. They felt less lonely. That makes sense. You have someone to talk to. They were more had positive affect. They felt more optimistic, a sense of purpose, a sense that they could affect their environment. But like I told you, friends affect you for better and for worse. So even though it looks like psychologically people are healthier, having and talking to friends on a daily basis was associated with some negative health behaviors. So having friends led you to, say, drink more, or they weren't exactly conducive to a lot of really healthy behavior. So part of it is just trying to unravel the mystery of how do friends affect our health? One natural question that I think a lot of people are curious about is, why do some friendships last while others don't? So friendships are really important. Isn't it really kind of curious how we can make the good ones last? So we've also tried to look at this. I will tell you, as someone who studies relationships, there's a whole theory about why relationships last. It's something called the investment model. And basically they say there's three things, according to these people, that are why relationships kind of last. One is if you're happy. Two is if you have a better offer, like are there other people you could, say, date or hang out with? And then something called investments, which have you already poured a ton of energy into a relationship? So if you feel like you've already put a ton into your relationship, you're more likely to kind of continue that. So what we did is we actually collected over 400 friend dyads. So we got friends to tell us about their relationship. And the really interesting thing about this research is the only thing that predicted whether or not friends stayed together was if they enjoyed spending time together. So it wasn't the sense that you could have a million friends. It wasn't the sense that you've been friends since you were in the second grade. It wasn't the sense that you're super desperate because you have no other options for people to hang out with. There is a sense in which a lot of our relationships continue because we derive good benefits from them and we enjoy kind of being around these people. How do friends affect us and our other relationships? I will tell you that there's been some really broad, large ecological studies where they'll follow entire populations of friends and kind of people in a neighborhood or people in a city. And they'll find that various types of negative mental health symptoms and even negative physical health behaviors tend to spread through social networks. So when you look at, say, if you're friends with someone with a really bad health problem, if they say smoke or if they have depression, a lot of times that kind of bleeds over and affects broader friend groups as well. So one really great appreciation that I've loved about Michigan State is that a lot of people here are interested in not just individuals, but rather these broader systems and how it kind of affects mental and physical health more broadly. There is a sense in which your relationships aren't independent of your friendships as well. So there's been surveys asking, how do you meet the person you're married to? The most common way that people meet each other is through other types of friends, or in a social setting, often with friends as well. And through work, through online dating, that's becoming increasingly larger, but there's a sense in which we meet people through our friends. So I'm running out of time a little bit, but I want to just kind of point out to a broader sense of the things that we are interested in as lab, namely that we oftentimes navigate through life with groups of friends and groups of social relationships that confer benefits or risks. So I never hesitate to tell people about my convoy or my friends. So if you'll just indulge me, these are friends that have helped me throughout my life. So for example, grad school was a really stressful time. Here is a picture from me and my friends in grad school when I was trying to grow a beard. I was in a fortunate time. And there's a sense in which a lot of my friends were kind of these crucial people in my lives that helped me kind of navigate really stressful times when I kind of needed help. Then I became a professor and we found new fun things to do together. So this is a picture from a llama festival that happens in Lansing every year. And there's a sense in which these kind of moments punctuate our lives and kind of give us a sense of meaning and purpose. And part of that is sort of what I wanted to talk to you about today. The idea that friendships are this thing that everybody says is important, but really historically, researchers just haven't really dived into a lot. And that's one thing that integrating community and researchers can be a really great help with, because we would not have known that this was such an important thing if we literally just didn't ask people, hey, what are the things that you think make you happy? So that's all I have for you today. I just wanted to thank you for coming today, and thanks to Dr. Thakkar for kind of, and Jessica for kind of facilitating all this. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have too. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bill. This is a fantastic talk, very interesting. So we have time for a few questions before we wrap up.
So I actually had a question. I was wondering if this was something that people could change. So like, is there some way that we can teach people to facilitate these healthy relationships?
Yeah, so they've actually tried to come up with experimental manipulations to try to do this. So like where you try to force people to be friends, and it's not as painful as it sounds. So there are people who think that what you need to do to make good friends is kind of disclose things about yourself. So the fact that I'll tell you about the things I like to do, the things that I'm thinking about at any given time, and then you disclose things in turn, and then we kind of do that back and forth. And there's a theory that says that's how intimacy between two people are built, the fact that we kind of talk to each other a lot. But it's incredibly hard that I think everyone over the age of 10 realizes it's really hard to keep and maintain good relationships. And it's something that I think we really struggle with as a society. So there's a researcher that says, he did a really funny study where he tried to quantify exactly how many hours it takes to make a friend. And the number is ridiculous. It's like almost like 400. You got to spend tons of time together to make like a really, really close friend. The question is, can we make friends more quickly? Like say, can you mesh with someone after 20 minutes and then kind of feel and have that supportive interaction? And the idea is that a lot of times we haven't prioritized it. A lot of time is dedicated to figuring out how marriages work, which is incredibly important, but then there's this whole other side to people's lives. So the answer is yes, but I don't have a lot of the great answers, unfortunately.
Thank you. And we have a question from the audience. How does one define friendship? I feel like there are friends that add to your life and, well, friends is in quotes, friends that add to your life and friends that don't. It seems like some would add joy and some that detract. So yes, the question is, how do you define friendship?
Yeah, so they've come up with definitions actually. So there's a scientifically approved or posited definition for what makes a friend. And it's really just kind of a mutual sustained interest in spending time with another person. And that's kind of the only thing. So it doesn't necessarily say that you have to enjoy each other's presence. So I told you that's a good relationship, a good friendship if you actually like each other. I think we can all agree on that. But you know, there's tons of people that you've known for a long time that you wouldn't say are friends, right? Like, you know, I've known them for 20 years. I don't exactly enjoy them, or I don't love spending time with them, or I don't spend time with them. And that's sort of the fuzzy boundary of what makes a friend too. So are you friend official? Can I kind of tell that other people that you're my friend? You know, that's sort of a psychological shift that we don't exactly know the exact moment that happens, but you know, psychologically it sometimes feels right. So when I ask people what their friends are, some people just say, as long as you say you're their friend and they say you're your friend, you are technically friends. So that's what developmental psychologists will do. So that's their definition. And then that's called kind of a peer nomination matrix. I kind of just left the individual kind of, if you feel like it's a friendship, it's probably a friendship.
Thank you. And I see Shermany has her hand raised.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So I thought, since would there be research, since it's not really research, friends, would there be research on when friends essentially break up and how like that affects people's lives? Because I feel like losing a great friend would also, you know, impact your mental health.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it's a massive loss. Like you kind of lose this social support system, right? The really weird thing is when you think of dating somebody, there's sort of a script that happens where you can say, hey, it's not really working out, or we should go separate ways, or you know, I don't feel like you're one long term. It's really hard to say that to a friend, especially, I just told you, the only criteria is like enjoying spending time with somebody. And it's so hard to tell another human, I'm sorry, you're just lame and I don't like you and I don't want to spend time with you. So on social media, there was kind of a lot of things going around about how hard it is to break up with friends, because sometimes you do need to cut people out of your life to be kind of in a healthy way. But yeah, it sort of mirrors a lot of interpersonal losses that we have, you know, whether that's say bereavement or divorce or widowhood. But again, the exact script about how that does or how long it takes to recover. Luckily, you can always make more friends. And that is kind of this thing that is in the background, but we haven't quite harnessed as a society. So that's kind of what we're hoping to do next. So thank you for that, Shermany.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Bill. And we're getting close to the final hour. So I just want to, oh, I thought I was muted. I just want to end by, again, extending my really sincere gratitude to all the speakers today for sharing their stories, their insights, their work, etc. I'd like to thank the attendees for showing up, for asking these great questions. Again, Jessica has pasted the contact information for this initiative into the chat. We'd love to hear from you in any regard, you know, join, ask us questions. And again, thank you so much. And I see one question here. For those watching that are not in the Lansing area, do you have suggestions for how they can find similar programs in their hometown? You know, I do not, but Patrick, you're in the Kalamazoo area. I wonder if,
research opportunities?
I think so. You know what, if whoever asked this question, why don't you shoot us an email and we can do some digging and try to get an answer for you. All right, everyone. Well, thank you again. Thanks for spending your time here and enjoy the rest of your evening. And thanks to all the speakers. Good night.